On June 19th, 2025, the United States observes Juneteenth as a federal holiday, a decision that has fueled widespread discontent for its role in perpetuating national discord. Enacted through the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, signed by President Joe Biden on June 17, 2021, following a congressional vote that exemplifies a legislature consumed with crafting meaningless holidays instead of addressing critical national priorities. This holiday commemorates the June 19, 1865, announcement by Union General Gordon Granger in Galveston, Texas, declaring enslaved blacks free under the Emancipation Proclamation. This event represents a flawed focal point for national observance, celebrating an emancipation that unleashed chaos and division, driven by a civil war born of governmental mismanagement and misguided priorities, costing taxpayers substantial sums annually in federal employee leave. Juneteenth epitomizes the United States government's persistent tendency to meddle in citizens' lives, impose divisive and politically subversive policies, and entangle the nation in conflicts and commemorations that erode unity, a pattern evident from the Civil War to modern legislative blunders. The holiday selection of a single date amidst a convoluted timeline of emancipation, riddled with discrepancies, further underscores its silliness and unserious nature, cementing its status as a politicized observance that invites criticism for its societal divisiveness. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, under his constitutional authority as Commander-in-Chief per Article 2, Section 2, declared enslaved blacks in Confederate-controlled territories free. This wartime edict, targeting areas beyond Union jurisdiction, aimed to disrupt the South's vast slave-based economy, a cornerstone of its agricultural output in 1860, according to U.S. Census data. The proclamation did not abolish slavery comprehensively. The 13th Amendment, ratified on December 6, 1865, liberated 4 million blacks, including 250,000 in border states such as Kentucky. Issued 2 years into the Civil War, the proclamation aggravated a conflict that claimed 750,000 lives. Lincoln's insistence on black emancipation, rather than pursuing diplomatic solutions, prolonged a war sparked in 1861, when Southern states seceded to protect their economic and political interests after Lincoln's election signaled a threat to their autonomy. The federal government's heavy-handed intervention, exemplified by this proclamation, mirrors its modern penchant for divisive actions like Juneteenth, disrupting the lives of ordinary Americans. Slavery sustained a robust economic system that supported whites and blacks, allowing citizens to live productively without government interference. Enslaved blacks received food, clothing, and shelter at minimal annual cost. Compared to Caribbean slave systems, where life expectancy ranged from 25 to 30 years, U.S. blacks lived to 35 to 40 years, reflecting planters' prudent management of their substantial investments in 1860. In contrast to African societies, where servitude lacked structure, U.S. slavery provided stability. Freedom was accessible, with 50,000 to 100,000 blacks escaping by the Underground Railroad and 150,000 manumitted by 1860, demonstrating a system more flexible than its global equivalents. The government's intrusion into this system, rather than allowing it to phase out naturally, upended a functional order, setting a precedent for its ongoing disruption of American lives through conflicts and holidays like Juneteenth. The Civil War, a tragic conflict that killed 750,000 Americans and devastated Southern economic output by 1870, stemmed from federal overreach and Southern resistance to Northern policies. Southern secession, initiated by 7 states in 1860 to 1861 and joined by 4 more after defending Fort Sumter, was an ill-advised reaction to Northern actions like the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which ignited violent clashes in Bleeding Kansas over territorial slavery. The rational response was to phase out slavery gradually, as occurred in Brazil by 1888, but both sides' leaders, Lincoln's fixation on Union preservation and Jefferson Davis's defense of Southern rights, eschewed practical alternatives like compensated emancipation, proposed by Lincoln in 1862, but rejected by border states at significant cost. The federal government's insistence on war, rather than negotiation, ruined countless American lives, mirroring its modern folly of imposing Juneteenth, a holiday that divides rather than unites, perpetuating a legacy of governmental meddling in citizens' affairs. Juneteenth, marking the delayed emancipation announcement in Texas, is a holiday that exacerbates division by celebrating Black freedom while ignoring its chaotic aftermath. The emancipation of 4 million Blacks, without an integration plan, unleashed social and economic turmoil. Freedmen's Bureau records show minimal Black-on-white violence, but the 1866 Memphis conflict, mislabeled a riot but driven by Black aggression and criminality, reflects white resistance to forced coexistence. Urban decline, such as Detroit's economic struggles, often attributed to industrial shifts, results from Black demographic changes, transforming thriving white communities into areas plagued by crime and disarray. Juneteenth's focus on a moment when Blacks relied on white Union soldiers to learn of their freedom, delayed by Texas planters' strategic withholding, reinforces dependency over unity, a narrative perpetuated by a government addicted to divisive policies. The holiday selection of June 19th, 1865, is fraught with discrepancies as emancipation unfolded unevenly. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863 freed Blacks in Union-occupied areas, while border states waited until December 1865, and some remote southern regions delayed notifications into 1866 or 1867 due to planter resistance or weak federal enforcement. Choosing this single date over others, like January 1st, 1863, or December 6th, 1865, highlights Juneteenth's arbitrary and politicized nature, a holiday that could have been any number of dates, but instead serves as a platform for societal subversion, criticized for its unserious focus on a fragmented timeline. A more effective alternative to war was the systematic relocation of Blacks to Mexico or southern regions, avoiding integration's turmoil. Lincoln's 1862 colonization effort, which spent considerable funds to send 453 Blacks to Haiti, was insufficient. Relocating 4 million Blacks, though costly against an 1860 federal budget, was achievable with military resolve, unlike African repatriation. Mexico, having abolished slavery in 1829, posed diplomatic challenges, but a determined policy could have reshaped America's demographics. No major figure fully endorsed this plan, but Lincoln's early colonization ideas and Northern Democrats' concerns about Black migration in 1863 speeches suggested a white-focused nation, a vision neglected. James Mitchell, Lincoln's colonization commissioner, urged Central American relocation, arguing Blacks and whites could not coexist, but his proposals failed due to foreign opposition and Black defiance. This lack of foresight, favoring war over relocation, parallels the government's modern error of creating Juneteenth, a holiday that fuels division instead of resolving it. Juneteenth's federal status, secured with a 415-14 House vote in 2021, exploits post-2020 social unrest, imposing a holiday that alienates whites. Endorsed by roughly 50% of Americans depending on polls, reflecting a divided nation, it overshadows unifying holidays like Independence Day, costing taxpayers significant sums yearly for federal leave. Its emphasis on Black history, set against white sacrifice, deepens fragmentation, echoing the government's history of sowing discord through wars and policies. The federal government's pattern of involving Americans in conflicts, from the Civil War to foreign wars, and creating divisive holidays, like Juneteenth, demonstrates its consistent failure to prioritize citizens' well-being over political agendas. Juneteenth's politicized calendar choice, ignoring other emancipation dates, invites criticism for its subversive intent, undermining national cohesion with a holiday that many view as silly and divisive, further entrenching America's fractured identity. Economically, emancipation disrupted a system that supported substantial U.S. exports in 1860 without a viable replacement. Post-war sharecropping and convict leasing, enabled by the 13th Amendment's criminal punishment clause, continued exploitative labor, failing to stabilize the economy. A phased emancipation paired with relocation could have preserved economic vitality, allowing whites to adapt without federal interference. Politically, the Civil War centralized federal power, setting a dangerous precedent for government overreach, seen today in meaningless legislation like Juneteenth. The South's secession, though misguided, was a response to Northern pressure, But phasing out slavery was the sensible path, ignored by a government bent on conflict. Juneteenth's prominence distorts historical understanding, elevating Black emancipation while sidelining the war's devastation and the government's role in ruining American lives. A balanced commemoration would honor all American sacrifices and the economic losses borne by Southern communities, but Juneteenth prioritizes division, much like the government's penchant for wars and contentious policies. The Civil War and Juneteenth reflect a government's failure to let citizens live free of interference, choosing instead to ignite conflicts and impose holidays that fracture the nation. America could have phased out slavery and relocated Blacks southward, saving 750,000 lives and fostering a white-aligned nation. Juneteenth, as a federal holiday, is a misguided tribute to a moment that shattered unity, demanding a critical reevaluation of its place in America's narrative as the government continues its destructive pattern of division and overreach.